Listen, this air traffic controller had been guiding planes safely for 12 years, managing commercial flights with precise professionalism from his radar tower. But when two passenger jets lost communication and headed for a mid-air collision over a major city, what he did next revealed why someone with his background chose ground-based aviation work, and why his voice carried the authority of someone who'd made life-or-death decisions at Mach 2. Chicago Terminal Radar Approach Control, TRACON, handled some of the busiest airspace in the United States, coordinating arrivals and departures for O'Hare International Airport and surrounding regional airports. On any given day, controllers guided over 2,000 aircraft through airspace that required precision timing and constant vigilance to prevent disasters. David "Eagle" Hendricks had been working as an approach controller for 12 years, handling the complex choreography of commercial aviation during peak traffic periods. His sector covered arrivals from the west, managing aircraft as they descended from cruise altitude toward O'Hare's parallel runways. David was known for his calm voice during emergency situations, his ability to manage multiple aircraft simultaneously, and his skill at finding solutions when weather or mechanical problems disrupted normal traffic flow. Pilots appreciated his clear communications and his knack for finding routes that saved time and fuel. What made David exceptional as an air traffic controller wasn't just his knowledge of procedures or his ability to visualize three-dimensional airspace. It was his understanding of aircraft performance capabilities, his comfort with high-stress decision-making, and his ability to think tactically when normal solutions weren't adequate. His colleagues assumed this expertise came from 12 years of civilian air traffic control and perhaps private pilot training. They had no idea it came from 8 years as an Air Force fighter pilot, flying F-16 Fighting Falcons in air superiority and close air support missions over Iraq and Afghanistan. Major David Hendricks had logged over 1,200 combat flight hours, conducting air-to-air intercepts, ground attack missions, and air defense operations in some of the world's most dangerous airspace. He'd been trained to make split-second tactical decisions while processing radar information, radio communications, threat assessments, and aircraft system status, all while flying at speeds that could kill him if he made a mistake. David had earned his call sign Eagle during David had left military service not because he couldn't handle fighter combat, but because 8 years of air warfare had been enough. He wanted to use his aviation skills to protect civilian aircraft rather than destroy enemy targets, to guide planes safely rather than shoot them down. Air traffic control had seemed perfect, using his understanding of aircraft capabilities and three-dimensional thinking to prevent accidents rather than cause them. For 12 years, it had been exactly the transition he needed. Until Tuesday afternoon at 3:47 p.m., when his two careers collided at 35,000 feet over downtown Chicago. David was managing 14 aircraft in his sector when United Flight 1247, a Boeing 737 with 167 passengers, reported communication difficulties during descent toward O'Hare. The aircraft's primary radio system had failed, leaving the crew with only backup communication systems that weren't functioning properly. Simultaneously, American Flight 892, another Boeing 737 with 183 passengers, was experiencing similar communication problems while climbing out of O'Hare on a departure route that would intersect with United 1247's path. David's radar screen showed both aircraft converging at the same altitude with closing speeds that would result in a mid-air collision in approximately 8 minutes. Standard separation procedures required aircraft to maintain specific distances, but without reliable communication, neither crew could receive instructions to change course. David attempted multiple emergency communication procedures, backup radio frequencies, relay through other aircraft, coordination with airline operations centers. Nothing worked. Both aircraft were flying on autopilot, following their last programmed routes, unaware they were heading toward each other. David made a tactical assessment using skills learned for air combat situations where communication might be compromised. aircraft performance characteristics, probable pilot responses, environmental factors, and available options for preventing collision. He had 8 minutes to solve a problem that had no standard solution. David began implementing emergency procedures that weren't in any air traffic control manual. Using his fighter pilot understanding of aircraft capabilities, he coordinated with other controllers to execute a plan that required precise timing and understanding of how commercial pilots would respond. "David, we're trying standard separation procedures." "Standard procedures won't work," David interrupted. "We need to use aircraft performance characteristics to create separation without direct communication. I have a plan, but it requires understanding how these aircraft will respond to specific flight path changes." David began directing other aircraft in his sector to create what fighter pilots call chaff corridors, flight paths that would force the converging aircraft to alter course based on standard collision avoidance procedures built into their autopilot systems. "Tower, I need you to flash runway approach lights in a specific sequence that United 1247's crew will interpret as instructions to initiate a standard holding pattern. Their autopilot will respond automatically." "David, that's not a standard procedure. It's not standard ATC, but it's standard aviation. Trust me on this." For the next 6 minutes, David orchestrated an aerial ballet that required understanding aircraft automation systems, pilot training responses, and three-dimensional geometry that most air traffic controllers never encounter. Using techniques adapted from air combat maneuvering, David positioned other aircraft to create visual and radar cues that would trigger automatic responses from the aircraft with communication failures. He was essentially flying the 2 Boeing 737s remotely by manipulating their automated systems through environmental inputs. "United 1247 is responding to the approach light sequence," called another controller. "Aircraft is entering holding pattern as programmed." "American 892 is following departure procedure modified by traffic separation automation," reported a third controller. "Autopilot is maintaining safe separation from converging traffic." David monitored both aircraft as they responded to his indirect guidance, using his fighter pilot understanding of how aircraft systems interact with pilot training and automated safety protocols. He was essentially conducting an aerial intercept in reverse. Instead of bringing aircraft together for combat, he was using the same principles to keep them apart for safety. "Separation increasing," David called as his plan worked. "United 1247 maintaining holding pattern. American 892 continuing modified departure route. Collision risk eliminated." Both aircraft eventually re-established communication and were guided safely to their destinations. United 1247 completing its approach to O'Hare. Chicago TRACON supervisor Janet Walsh reviewed the incident recordings, trying to understand how David had managed aircraft separation using procedures that weren't in any manual. "David, what you did, using aircraft automation systems and pilot response protocols to create separation without direct communication. Where did you learn that?" David was updating aircraft position logs, returning to the routine paperwork that followed every successful traffic management sequence. "Fighter pilot training, ma'am. Air Force F-16s, 8 years active duty." "Fighter pilot? You flew fighter jets?" "F-16 Fighting Falcons. Air superiority and close air support missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. Call sign was Eagle." Supervisor Walsh looked at the incident reports, at the innovative solutions that had prevented catastrophe, at the three-dimensional thinking that had saved nearly 900 lives. "David, why are you working air traffic control? With your pilot background, you could be flying for the airlines, making 3 times what we pay controllers." David smiled. "Ma'am, I spent 8 years in the Air Force learning how to destroy aircraft. Working ATC lets me use those same skills to protect them. I'd rather keep planes safe than be responsible for what happens to them." The near-miss incident was investigated by the FAA, the NTSB, and airline safety departments. but the details were classified to prevent panic about communication system vulnerabilities. David's innovative use of indirect aircraft guidance became a case study in emergency procedures, though his specific techniques weren't publicly released. Word spread through the aviation community about the Chicago controller who'd prevented a major disaster using methods that went beyond standard training. Other air traffic control facilities began consulting with Chicago TRACON about emergency procedures for communication failures. David found himself training other controllers in advanced aircraft separation techniques, teaching them to think like pilots rather than just traffic managers. His approach, understanding aircraft as dynamic systems rather than just radar blips, became part of the training curriculum. David, Supervisor Walsh said during a meeting 6 months after the incident, "We've had requests from the FAA asking if you'd consider a position." David continued working as an approach controller at Chicago TRACON, but his role had expanded to include training and emergency protocol development. His unique combination of fighter pilot experience and air traffic control expertise made him a resource for the entire aviation safety community. He developed simulation training scenarios that helped controllers understand aircraft capabilities beyond what they learned in standard training. His programs taught controllers to think three-dimensionally, to understand pilot decision-making processes, and to use aircraft automation systems as tools for traffic management. But David's greatest contribution was proving that aviation safety required people who understood flying from multiple perspectives, not just as controllers or pilots, but as professionals who could adapt their skills when normal procedures weren't adequate. So now I gotta ask you guys, have you ever thought about the air traffic controllers who guide every flight you take? About what they might have flown, where they might have served, what experiences shaped their ability to keep aircraft safely separated in busy skies? Drop a comment about the aviation professionals who keep you safe during every flight. The people whose backgrounds you might never know, but whose skills and vigilance protect thousands of passengers every day. Because here on the Human Stories, we honor the fighter pilots who came home and kept flying, just from control towers instead of cockpits, using their combat aviation skills to protect civilian aircraft rather than destroy enemy targets. Thanks for watching, guys. If this story moved you, share it with someone who works in aviation and deserves recognition for keeping the skies safe. Hit subscribe to help us celebrate the pilots who never stopped flying. They just found new ways to keep people safe in the air. And the next time you're on a commercial flight, remember David Eagle Hendricks. Remember that some of the most skilled aviation professionals are working in control towers, using fighter pilot thinking to prevent disasters and keep passengers safe. Because sometimes the most important air combat happens in radar rooms, where former fighter pilots use their tactical skills to win battles against physics, time, and mechanical failure. Battles where victory means everyone gets home safely. That's what real pilots do. They keep flying, whatever form that service takes.